My name is Rachel. I'm 30 years old and I'll never forget that Christmas dinner when my brother leaned toward my parents and whispered that I was still doing a stupid job and living off the family. The whole table laughed and I sat there with my spoon frozen smiling like nothing hurt. Have you ever swallowed your pride at a family table staying silent while everyone compared you to the golden child? I stayed quiet that night, but inside I carried a secret. By morning, the same stupid job they mocked would shake the world. What happened next changed everything. There are moments you never forget, as if they're carved into your memory with a blade. For me, it was that Christmas dinner in Pittsburgh. The wind outside rattled the windows. Snow piled along the street, but inside the house the air felt heavy with the smell of roasted turkey and spiced wine. I sat near the end of the table facing the glittering tree, listening to the noise of forks scraping plates and glasses clinking together. My mother Margaret, in her red velvet dress, looked composed as always. My father Charles held his wine glass in silence, his eyes lowered like he was bracing for a storm. My brother Daniel sat tall, his gray tailored suit fitted perfectly, his wrist flashing with the new watch he had shown off more than once already. I wore a plain old sweater I'd bought years ago at MIT, the wool slightly frayed at the cuffs. The conversation swirled around Daniel. He laughed loud, telling stories of his banking deals, mergers worth billions, colleagues who looked up to him. Mother listened, smiling with pride, her gaze soft on him. I chewed slowly, pretending to focus on my soup, though every word pressed against my chest like a weight. Then Daniel leaned closer to my mother. His voice lowered, but not enough to escape me. She's still doing that ridiculous job, and she's still depending on this family. My mother didn't even flinch. She nodded slightly, lips pursed. I know. My father took another sip of wine, his silence louder than words. My hands froze over the spoon. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to stay still. I didn't raise my eyes. I didn't let them see the darkness behind them. Instead, I lifted my spoon again, steadying the tremor in my fingers. I smiled faintly as if nothing had pierced me. Inside, two voices battled. One urged me to slam the spoon down, to shout that I wasn't living off anyone. The other whispered, "Stay quiet. Let them think I'm weak. Let them think I've failed. Tomorrow they will see. Tomorrow everything will shift." I looked around the table. The irony was sharp, the whole family hanging on Daniel's every word, while I, holding the secret that would change all of our lives, sat invisible. "Daniel, tell us about your new car," Mother said, brightly refilling his glass. His smile widened. "BMW. Brand new. A car like this isn't just for driving, it's so people know who you are." The table burst into laughter. I laughed with them, my lips curving though my insides felt like ice. Across the table, my father set down his glass quietly. For a fleeting second, his eyes met mine. There was no laughter in them, only a quiet, steady message: hold on. I gave him the smallest nod, my secret answer. Then came the twist. My younger cousin Emily, perched beside me, leaned forward with a curious look. Her voice, small but clear, cut through the noise. "Rachel, what's a stupid job Mom said you make?" "Smart shoes." The room roared. Daniel slapped his palm on the table, laughing until tears glistened in his eyes. "See? Even the kids think it's a joke." The laughter spread, shaking the table. I turned to Emily, meeting her innocent gaze. I smiled softly. "Yes, smart shoes. They help people walk better. Sounds silly, doesn't it?" My mother shook her head, poured herself another glass, saying nothing. I pressed the spoon into my palm hard enough that my nails left marks. Still I smiled. Let them laugh. Let them think I was the weak one. Because this ignorance, this blindness, was my shield. As chatter swelled again, I turned my eyes to the window. Snow was falling thicker, blanketing the quiet street outside. The light from the street lamp stretched across the glass, fractured by the frost. I breathed deeply, steadying myself. One more night. Just one more night. It was the choice I made to stay silent, to guard my secret until morning when the world would hear it from the headlines, not from me. I set my spoon down. I dabbed my lips with the napkin. Then slowly I lifted my head and gave the table a full, unbroken smile. Nobody noticed. They didn't need to, because I knew at that moment I had passed the first test. 2013. Pittsburgh winters have a way of slicing straight through your bones. That Christmas Eve, St. Paul's Church was glowing with lights' voices carrying silent night through the air. I sat with my family in the second pew, just behind my grandfather William. He had always been strong, a steelworker who'd carried the weight of a family on his shoulders. Yet in that moment as the hymn swelled, I saw him falter. He dropped to his knees, then collapsed. Panic rippled through the pews. My father shouted for help. My hands reached him. Before anyone else. His skin cold, his breathing shallow. A nurse from the choir rushed forward. Calling 911. The song faltered, voices cut off. Mid-note the church echoing with confusion. Later the doctors said it was Parkinson's. It had been creeping in unseen until it finally claimed his strength right there in front of the whole congregation. That image never left me. A man who had stood unshaken by molten steel was undone by a disease that stole his balance and dignity. At the hospital, I sat by his bed, the machines hissing. His hand trembled as it closed around mine. His words came broken, uneven. "Rachel, do something, so others don't." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. I promised him I would. That promise became the anchor of my life. At the time, I was a senior at MIT. My path had been mapped out, finish with honors. Take a job on Wall Street, maybe even land in the same circles Daniel bragged about. My mother would beam proud to have at least one child with a real career. But after that night, I couldn't follow the script anymore. I spent hours buried in research, devouring everything I could about Parkinson's and falls. One night in my dorm, I stared down at my beat-up sneakers. What if they could talk? What if a shoe could warn someone before a fall? It sounded absurd, the kind of half-baked dream professors laughed off. But it refused to leave me. I told my father. He didn't laugh. A few days later, he handed me a box. Inside was a second-hand electronics kit. "I don't know much about this stuff," he said, smiling sheepishly. "But maybe you can make something out of it." I started building in that tiny dorm room. Wires sprawled across my desk, sensors taped clumsily into shoe soles, my laptop humming late into the night. My roommate rolled her eyes and muttered about the smell of solder. One time, a fuse blew, filling the hall with smoke and sending the entire floor evacuating. I should have been embarrassed. Instead, I felt alive. Then came the phone call. "Rachel." My mother's voice snapped through the line. "You're about to graduate from MIT. You should be networking for Wall Street, not playing with wires." "I'm not playing," I said softly. "I'm building something that could help people. This is what I want to do." There was silence on the other end. Then a sharp sigh. "You're just like your father, always chasing dreams. But dreams don't pay the bills." The line went dead. I sat there with the soldering iron still warm in my hand. Tears blurred the circuit board. Her words cut deep, but when I closed my eyes, I saw my grandfather crumpling to the church floor. His voice echoed in my memory. "Do something." I couldn't walk away from that. Weeks passed. My desk became a battlefield of failed prototype sensors that gave gibberish wires that snapped. Every failure whispered that maybe she was right. But then came a night in January. I slipped on a pair of sneakers rigged with sensors plugged into my laptop. Numbers scrolled across the screen. Not nonsense this time. A pattern. A signal tied to the rhythm of my steps. I froze watching the graph rise and fall with each movement. For the first time, the idea wasn't just a fantasy. It was data. Real, undeniable. My chest tightened, not with fear but exhilaration. I laughed out loud alone in that cramped dorm. It wasn't much, just jagged lines on a screen. But it was proof. People could call it foolish. They could sneer, as my mother had, that I was wasting potential. But in that moment, I knew I had found my path. Mini-climax came with the rush of seeing possibility transform into evidence. It was still fragile, still far from saving anyone, but it was alive. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the hum of my laptop still in the room. For the first time, I felt certain. Not of success, not of money, but of purpose. I didn't know then how many times I'd hear the same line again, "Dreams don't pay the bills." I didn't know how much harder it would get. But I did know this: I had taken the first step toward keeping my promise. And I also didn't realize that when I carried my strange prototype into a room full of investors for the very first time, the humiliation waiting for me would sting far worse than my mother's doubts. After graduation, I didn't choose the glass towers of Manhattan the way Daniel did. I chose a garage on the edge of Boston. It wasn't glamorous. The air carried the smell of oil and solder wires tangled across the floor, and a 3D printer buzzed endlessly in the corner. That garage became my office, my lab, and sometimes my home. Ethan Rivera was there with me. He was a young engineer I'd met at MIT, sharp and stubborn in the same way I was. He wiped sweat from his brow while fitting a sensor into a shoe sole. "You sure you want to stake your life on this?" he asked. I nodded without hesitation. If it saves even one life, it's worth it. We called it Stride Step. Smart shoes. Sensors tucked inside feeding data into an app that could pick up subtle changes in gait, the earliest warning signs of Parkinson's. On paper, it sounded almost too simple, but to us, it was everything. The truth was, ideas don't pay bills. To keep the lights on, we needed funding. I pored over pitch decks for weeks, filling slides with data charts, patient case studies, market projections. I believed that if just one investor listened with an open mind, they would see what we saw. Our first big meeting was with Victoria Hayes, a well-known venture capitalist in Cambridge. The moment we stepped into her office, I felt out of place. Polished marble floors reflected the light from expensive modern art on the walls. I wore a borrowed business dress from my roommate and heels that pinched my toes. I pitched with everything I had. I spoke about millions of Americans living with Parkinson's, the devastating cost of falls, and how Stride Step could save lives and billions in healthcare. My voice trembled not with doubt but with urgency. When I finished, Victoria leaned back in her chair. Her smile was thin, her eyes cold. "Smart shoes," she said. "This sounds like a toy you'd find at Walmart. Who's going to pay real money for that?" The words landed like a slap. Silence filled the room. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. "We've tested it." I pushed back my voice steadier than I felt. "A patient avoided a serious accident thanks to our prototype." Victoria's laugh was sharp. "One patient. You expect me to invest millions into something that's only helped one person? Come back when you have something substantial." She snapped her laptop shut, stood and nodded toward the door. We were dismissed. Walking out of that office, the cold Boston wind hit my face harder than her words had. Ethan didn't say a thing, but I could see it in his eyes. We both knew this was just the beginning of a long string of rejections. Not long after, the press came for us, too. A tech magazine ran a headline, "Stride Step Expensive Shoes for Dreamers." The article spread like wildfire. Twitter turned us into a punchline. Inside the garage, the blow cut deeper. Kevin, one of the engineers who had recently joined, tossed his keycard onto the table. "Sorry, Rachel," he muttered. "I need a real job. I can't waste time on shoes no one wants." I didn't stop him. I just watched him walk out the door, slamming behind him, leaving the garage colder than ever. That night, the silence pressed down heavily. I stared at the prototype on the bench wires sprawled across the surface. My mother's voice replayed in my head. Dreams don't pay the bills. Now it wasn't just her. Investors, the press, even my own team, they were all saying the same thing. I dropped my head into my arms, my shoulders shaking. For a few minutes, I let myself believe it was over. That I had been foolish to think a pair of shoes could change anything. But then I opened my eyes. The shoe was still there, its tiny sensor light blinking steadily, like a pulse. Proof that it was alive. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and straightened. "We're not done," I whispered. Not to Ethan, not to the press, not even to my family, but to myself, to the promise I'd made years ago in that hospital room. The world thought I was chasing a foolish dream. They had no idea how determined I was to see it through. And while I was fighting in a cold Boston garage to keep my company breathing, Daniel was back in Pittsburgh being celebrated at family dinners like a star. I didn't know then how humiliating my next trip home would be. The summer after that humiliating round of rejections, I went back to Pittsburgh. It was my grandmother's birthday, and in our family that meant everyone, cousins, uncles, aunts, would cram into her old red brick house. The air smelled of grilled meat and fresh apple pie, and laughter spilled out through the open windows. I walked in with a small gift bag, smiling as if I had left all my struggles back in Boston. But inside, I already knew how the night would unfold. To them, I was still the daughter chasing silly dreams. The living room was packed warm with chatter. Daniel stood right in the center, suit-sharp shoes, polished his wineglass, raised like he owned the room. "They're considering me for a partner," he said with that confident grin. The crowd erupted in applause. Uncle Paul clapped him on the back. "No one in the Morgan family has ever made it that high in banking. You're making history, son." I stood near the edge, fingers tightening around my glass of water. I wasn't jealous. Not exactly. But the comparison hung in the air heavy and unavoidable. And soon enough, it came. Mom's eyes landed on me. She sighed, the way only a mother can, with a mix of pity and disappointment. "Rachel, you're almost 30. You can't keep chasing these little projects forever. Look at your brother's stable, respected. That's the path you should be on." The room went silent. Every eye turned toward me, waiting to see if I'd argue, waiting to see me shrink. My throat felt dry. I wanted to tell them about the data we had collected about patients whose balance had been saved by our prototype. But what good would it do? They would laugh just like the investors had. A cousin broke the silence. "It's true. Rachel's smart, no one doubts that. But smart's without direction. It's wasted." The room chuckled, the sound sharp cutting. My face burned, but I stayed still, holding my glass like it was an anchor. And then I saw Dad sitting quietly in the corner as he always did. Never loud, never showy. He wasn't smiling. He was looking straight at me, eyes steady, and he gave the smallest nod. No words, no speeches, just that silent gesture. But it was enough. I straightened my shoulders, forcing my voice to stay calm. "Congratulations, Daniel," I said, lifting my glass toward him. A partner is no small thing. Some relatives smiled, relieved, maybe even smug, thinking I had finally learned my place. Daniel basked in the attention, lifting his glass higher. But inside me, something else stirred. I wasn't surrendering. I was choosing silence. Not because they were right, but because the timing wasn't. The day would come when I wouldn't need to argue, when my work would speak louder than any of their doubts. The laughter moved on, the conversations shifted, and I slipped to the back porch. The summer night air was thick with the smell of cut grass and charcoal smoke. I leaned against the railing, breathing in, steadying myself. Behind me, Daniel's voice carried on about markets and mergers, the family soaking it up like gospel. I whispered under my breath, not for anyone else to hear. "Just wait." In that crowded room, they saw me as the weak one, but what they didn't know was that silence was my shield. I wouldn't break tonight. I would bide my time, and when the moment came, every single one of them would see who I really was. The party ended with more applause for Daniel, hugs for Grandma, and polite goodbyes. I handed her my small gift, kissed her cheek, and slipped out before anyone could corner me again. As I drove back to Boston the next morning, the city skyline coming into view, I knew reality was waiting, unpaid bills, a company on the brink, and more sleepless nights. But I also knew something they didn't. Sometimes one letter, one message could change everything. That night, as I sorted through the pile of overdue bills on my desk, I found an envelope. Inside was a letter that would remind me why I couldn't quit. A letter that proved Stride Step wasn't just a dream, it was already saving lives. Boston was nothing like Pittsburgh. The city moved fast, loud, and expensive. I rented a tiny apartment in Allston, barely enough space to breathe. Rent drained almost every dollar I had, and student loan bills stacked on my desk like an unscalable wall. But it wasn't just me sacrificing. My team at Stride Step 5 engineers, all barely out of school, were giving up just as much. Mark, our machine learning guy, lived with 2 roommates in a cramped studio. Ashley pulled night shifts at a cafe, then showed up at the garage at 8 a.m. with coffee for everyone. They didn't have much, but they came every morning, shoulders squared, eyes bright, watching the data scroll across the monitors. One night I came back to the garage after a late meeting. The place smelled of solder and takeout noodles. Two of my engineers had fallen asleep on the workbench, faces pressed against their laptops. I just stood there watching. My chest ached in a way I couldn't name. These kids believed in me. They believed in Stride Step. While the rest of the world mocked us, they kept building. But belief didn't pay rent. Some nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, asking myself, how much longer can I ask them to keep sacrificing for something that might never work? Sometimes I'd call my mom, not to ask for money, but just to hear her voice. She never made it easy. "Rachel," she'd sigh. "I told you. You're driving yourself into a dead end." I didn't argue. I didn't tell her about the nights I slept under my desk or the bills I shoved unopened into drawers. To her, my life was proof she was right all along. Then one afternoon in the middle of winter, my inbox pinged. The subject line read, "Thank you, Stride Step." The message was from a woman in Ohio, Hannah Cooper. Her father, 72, had nearly fallen while gardening. The shoes alerted them. A doctor diagnosed Parkinson's at an early stage. "Because of you," Hannah wrote, "my dad still has a chance. You saved our family. Thank you." I froze. Read it again, and again. Then the tears came. All the rejection, the empty bank account, the humiliation. It collapsed into this one moment. For the first time, Stride Step wasn't just data on a slide deck. It was life. Real, tangible life. A father in Ohio would see another Christmas because of us. The next day, I printed Hannah's email and taped it to the garage wall. My team gathered around reading in silence. Ashley whispered, "We're not crazy, are we?" I shook my head. "No, we're not insane." That email became our fuel. Whenever the bills piled too high, whenever another investor laughed us out of the room, we'd look at Hannah's words. And we kept going. The world outside didn't see what we saw. Social media still joked about us. Venture blogs called us MIT kids playing entrepreneur. Every snide remark cut, but Hannah's letter stitched me back together. Still, I knew survival meant more than faith. It meant money. If we could find just one big deal, everything would change. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in Pittsburgh, Daniel was busy showing off his new BMW. He was climbing higher at his bank, talking about a merger worth billions. My family listened to him like he was a prophet. He strutted at those dinners as though the world belonged to him. He didn't know it yet, but the ground under his feet was cracking. As for me, I had Hannah's email taped to a garage wall and a team running on fumes. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt like we were holding something the world just hadn't recognized yet. I shut down my laptop that night and whispered to the dark garage, "We're not done yet." Because while Stride Step clung to life, Daniel was building a tower on sand, and storms were coming for both of us. While I sat in my Boston kitchen slurping cheap noodles, Daniel was making an entrance. In Pittsburgh, he pulled up to the golf club in a brand new black BMW tires, still carrying that sharp rubber smell. He stepped out in a tailored navy suit, cufflinks, catching the evening lights, Rolex gleaming. Inside, the family and a few of his colleagues waited with champagne. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel announced, raising his glass, "our upcoming merger will shake Wall Street to its core. We're talking tens of billions. We'll lead the entire sector." Applause erupted. My mother beamed like he'd just brought home a Nobel Prize. My relatives clapped his back, their laughter echoing under the chandelier. And me, I wasn't even a footnote in the conversation. Stride stepped the garage, the ramen all invisible. But while Daniel was basking in applause, I knew reality wasn't nearly so polished. In New York, his office carried a different atmosphere. Fluorescent lights hummed over tense faces. In the break room, two associates whispered over coffee. "You hear the SEC might be circling," one muttered. "Yeah. The numbers look off. Something's buried there." The moment Daniel stepped inside, their conversation cut off. They scattered like birds startled mid-flight. He adjusted his tie, smirked as if he hadn't heard a thing, but the silence was deafening. Later that afternoon, the tension boiled over in a conference room lined with glass walls. Papers shuffled, voices low, until Thomas Blake, the senior partner, slammed a folder onto the table. Daniel Blake's tone was clipped. Rumors are circulating that the SEC is preparing a preliminary review. I want contingency plans on my desk. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a smile plastered on. With all due respect, sir, it's chatter. Our numbers stand. Blake's fist hit the folder again. Listen carefully. If one error shows up, one inconsistency, you will shoulder the blame. Do you understand me? The room froze. Daniel's smirk faltered. He nodded, jaw tight, fingers gripping his pen until his knuckles whitened. That night, while Daniel posed for pictures beside champagne towers, I got a call in Boston. The name on the screen made me pause, mark an old MIT friend who now worked in financial analytics. Rachel, he said without preamble, is your brother tied to that massive merger deal? Yeah, I answered, trying to sound casual. He hasn't shut up about it. Mark sighed. Rachel, it's bad. One of the partner banks is hiding enormous losses. If regulators dig in, and they will, the whole thing could implode. People are already whispering. I sat there in the cold garage, surrounded by wires and half-built shoes, my laptop screen glowing. I pictured Daniel clinking glasses and Pittsburgh BMW keys jangling in his pocket while the ground beneath him cracked open. I didn't say anything to Mark right away. My throat felt tight. I wanted to scream the truth at every relative who toasted him, to tell my mother her golden boy was walking a tightrope without a net. But instead, I stayed silent. Secrets, after all, have a way of surfacing on their own. The contrast was almost cruel. Daniel strutted across golf clubs and boardrooms, hailed as a rising star. I sat in a garage eating reheated noodles, mocked by investors and dismissed by my own family. Yet here I was, holding a sliver of truth that could topple him. And as fate would have it, the universe was tilting. A week later, as I sifted through StrideStep's overflowing inbox, a different kind of message appeared. Not another thank you from a patient, not another rejection from a VC. This one carried the logo of a global healthcare giant. Dear Ms. Morgan, we would like to initiate discussions regarding the potential acquisition of StrideStep AI. Please confirm availability. I blinked, read it again, then again. Outside Boston, snow fell in heavy sheets, muffling the city's usual chaos. Inside, my breath caught. Daniel had his champagne flutes and golf club toasts. I had an email, just text on a screen, really. But between the two of us, only one story was built on a foundation that could last. Daniel's secrets were starting to leak, and mine were about to explode into the open. While I sat in my Boston kitchen slurping cheap noodles, Daniel was making an entrance. In Pittsburgh, he pulled up to the golf club in a brand-new black BMW tires, still carrying that sharp rubber smell. He stepped out in a tailored navy suit, cufflinks, catching the evening lights, Rolex gleaming. Inside, the family and a few of his colleagues waited with champagne. Ladies and gentlemen, Daniel announced, raising his glass, our upcoming merger will shake Wall Street to its core. We're talking tens of billions. We'll lead the entire sector. Applause erupted. My mother beamed like he'd just brought home a Nobel Prize. My relatives clapped his back, their laughter echoing under the chandelier. And me, I wasn't even a footnote in the conversation. StrideStep the garage, the ramen all invisible. But while Daniel was basking in applause, I knew reality wasn't nearly so polished. In New York, his office carried a different atmosphere. Fluorescent lights hummed over tense faces. In the break room, two associates whispered over coffee. You hear the SEC might be circling, one muttered. Yeah. The numbers look off. Something's buried there. The moment Daniel stepped inside, their conversation cut off. They scattered like birds startled mid-flight. He adjusted his tie, smirked as if he hadn't heard a thing, but the silence was deafening. Later that afternoon, the tension boiled over in a conference room lined with glass walls. Papers shuffled, voices low, until Thomas Blake, the senior partner, slammed a folder onto the table. Daniel Blake's tone was clipped. Rumors are circulating that the SEC is preparing a preliminary review. I want contingency plans on my desk. Daniel leaned back in his chair, a smile plastered on. With all due respect, sir, It's just noise. Our numbers stand. Blake's fist hit the folder again. Listen carefully. If one error shows up, one inconsistency, you will shoulder the blame. Do you understand me? The room froze. Daniel's smirk faltered. He nodded, jaw-tight fingers gripping his pen until his knuckles whitened. That night, while Daniel posed for pictures beside champagne towers, I got a call in Boston. The name on the screen made me pause. Mark, an old MIT friend who now worked in financial analytics. Rachel, he said without preamble, is your brother tied to that massive merger deal? Yeah, I answered, trying to sound casual. He hasn't shut up about it. Mark sighed. Rachel, it's bad. One of the partner banks is hiding enormous losses. If regulators dig in, and they will, the whole thing could implode. People are already whispering. I sat there in the cold garage, surrounded by wires and half-built shoes, my laptop screen glowing. I pictured Daniel clinking glasses and Pittsburgh BMW keys jangling in his pocket while the ground beneath him cracked open. I didn't say anything to Mark right away. My throat felt tight. I wanted to scream the truth at every relative who toasted him, to tell my mother her golden boy was walking a tightrope without a net. But instead, I stayed silent. Secrets, after all, have a way of surfacing on their own. The contrast was almost cruel. Daniel strutted across golf clubs and boardrooms, hailed as a rising star. I sat in a garage eating reheated noodles, mocked by investors and dismissed by my own family. Yet here I was, holding a sliver of truth that could topple him. And as fate would have it, the universe was tilting. A week later, as I sifted through StrideStep's overflowing inbox, a different kind of message appeared. Not another thank you from a patient, not another rejection from a VC. This one carried the logo of a global healthcare giant, Arshemez. Morgan, we would like to initiate discussions regarding the potential acquisition of StrideStep AI. Please confirm availability. I blinked, read it again, then again. Outside Boston, snow fell in heavy sheets, muffling the city's usual chaos. Inside, my breath caught. Daniel had his champagne flutes and golf club toasts. I had an email, just text on a screen, really. But between the two of us, only one story was built on a foundation that could last. Daniel's secrets were starting to leak, and mine were about to explode into the open. Boston at the end of December was always unforgiving. The sidewalks were buried under layers of snow streetlights, casting golden streaks over the deserted streets. I sat in the tiny office of StrideStep, my coat still draped over my chair, my fingers frozen, even though the heater buzzed loudly. The glow of the laptop lit up my face. On the screen, an email stared back at me, all finalized. Press release scheduled for 8:00 a.m. tomorrow. The sender, Olivia Grant, the attorney assigned by MedLife Tech. I read the line over and over, my breath fogging the screen. It didn't feel real. After years of sacrifice, rejection, and ridicule, everything was about to end with a number so outrageous I could hardly process it: $3.8 billion. Behind me, Ethan was slumped over his desk. He had fallen asleep mid-sentence, his notebook open, scribbles half-finished. His glasses were askew, the kind of exhaustion only months of non-stop grind could bring. I stood gently, pulling a jacket over his shoulders. We did it, I whispered, though I knew he couldn't hear me. For the first time, I allowed myself a fragile smile. But I also knew this was just the calm before the storm. Tomorrow the world will know. Tonight, I still had to survive one more dinner with my family. I packed my bag, got into my old Corolla, and drove the long road back to Pittsburgh. The car rattled over every bump on the highway, the check engine light glowing like a warning. Snow streaked sideways in the beams of my headlights. My chest felt tight. It wasn't joy. It was the weight of holding in a truth so big I thought it might crush me if I didn't let it out. At one gas station stop, I sat with my hands gripping the steering wheel, whispering to myself, just make it through tonight. Tomorrow, everything changes. By the time I pulled into my parents' driveway, it was close to midnight. The house glowed warm with holiday lights. Through the window, I could see Daniel's silhouette, his hands moving animatedly as he spoke, the sound of laughter spilling out when I opened the door. Rachel, there you are, Mom called from the kitchen, her face lighting up, though not with pride, more like relief that I had at least made it home on time. She handed me an apron. "Help me with these dishes." The kitchen smelled of cinnamon and roast turkey. I rolled up my sleeves and joined her at the sink. Water splashed against the porcelain bubbles clinging to my hands. From the living room came Daniel's booming voice. "This merger is going to set records. We're talking tens of billions. I'll be one of the youngest partners in the firm." The room erupted in applause. Mom placed a plate into the drying rack and sighed. "Rachel, I just wish you could be more like your brother. Look at him, stable, successful, respected. He has a real career. You? I don't even know what you're doing anymore." Her words landed like stones in my chest. I gripped the towel tighter, twisting it until the fabric wrinkled. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I sneaked a glance. It was Olivia's email again, still bold in my inbox. "Everything is finalized." I stood there caught between two worlds, my mother's disappointment pressing down on me and the knowledge that in just a few hours everything would change forever. For a moment I wanted to shout. I wanted to slam the dish down and scream, "I built something worth more than Daniel could ever dream of." Instead I swallowed it. Timing was everything. We carried the plates into the living room. The family gathered around the Christmas tree lights, twinkling ornaments reflecting the fire in the hearth. Daniel handed out gifts wrapped in shiny paper. He beamed as he displayed a luxury watch, another token of his self-made success. Relatives oohed and awed. I sat in the corner phone on my lap, sipping a glass of wine. My mother smiled at Daniel, her eyes glowing with pride. No one looked my way. I was invisible in my own family's celebration. But invisibility has its advantages. While they were busy laughing, I was watching the clock. Midnight crept closer. Every tick of the second hand was a countdown not just to Christmas morning, but to the announcement that would rewrite everything. Inside, my emotions churned. Frustration, anticipation, a strange kind of giddy fear. I thought of all the times I'd been told I was wasting my life. All the dinners where I was the butt of their jokes. All the nights in Boston when I went to bed hungry too, broke to afford anything better than frozen noodles. Tomorrow, all of it would mean something. Daniel clinked his glass. "To the Morgans. May we always rise higher and higher." Cheers erupted around him. I lifted my glass too, though my smile didn't reach my eyes. In my head, I whispered, "Enjoy it while you can, Daniel." After the presents were opened, people began to drift off to bed. I stayed in the living room alone with the tree. The lights blinked in steady rhythm, casting shadows across the floor. I opened Olivia's email one last time, my finger hovering over the screen. 3.8 billion. I exhaled long and slow. Tomorrow morning, CNBC and Bloomberg would break the story. Reporters would scramble. Phones would ring. Stride Step, the stupid job everyone mocked, would be front-page news. I leaned back on the couch, wine glass empty, and closed my eyes. The storm hadn't hit yet, but I could already feel the winds shifting. The morning of December 26th, I woke before dawn in my Boston apartment. The room was cold, the windows frosted white from a night of heavy snow. I pulled the blanket tighter around me and reached for my phone. The screen lit up the dark room, and for a moment I just stared at the time, 7:59 a.m. My hand trembled as I refreshed my email. Then it happened. At exactly 8 o'clock, alerts poured in. CNBC's headline hit first. MedLife Tech acquires StrideStep AI for $3.8 billion, the largest health tech deal of the year. I blinked at the screen, hardly believing the words were real. Seconds later, Bloomberg joined in. Rachel Morgan, 30, becomes one of the youngest self-made women billionaires in health technology. My photo, the one taken weeks earlier in our makeshift garage office, flashed across the broadcast image. My smile, tired but stubborn, filled the screen. I sat frozen in the dim glow of my laptop, the sound of my own breathing louder than the news anchors' voices. After years of rejection, ridicule, and nights that felt endless, it was real. My phone vibrated so hard it almost slid off the table. Messages stacked one after another, but one name stood out. My father. Proud of you. Always. I read the words twice, then a third time. Short, steady. But from him, it carried the weight of every silent glance, every quiet nod he'd given me when no one else believed. Tears blurred my vision, spilling onto my hands before I could wipe them away. Another notification. Ethan. We did it. Rachel. Everyone's at the garage. We're on TV. Turn it on. I scrambled for the remote, flicked the screen to CNBC. The anchor was talking fast, his excitement barely contained. Behind him played clips of Stride Step's journey photos of our scrappy prototypes, video of Ethan soldering wires at 3 a.m, shots of our small team hugging one another. The chyron at the bottom read, "From garage startup to global impact." The camera cut to one of our engineers, his voice cracking, as he told the reporter, "We knew this could change lives. Today, the entire world knows it too." I pressed a hand to my mouth, overwhelmed. For the first time, the laughter, the whispers, the labels of naive dreamer were drowned out by something bigger. Validation. Meanwhile in Pittsburgh, a very different morning unfolded. My mother Margaret stood in the kitchen of the red brick house, pouring herself a cup of coffee. The TV in the living room droned on in the background until a name caught her ear. She glanced at the screen just as my face appeared framed by the headline announcing the multi-billion-dollar sale. The cup slipped from her hand, shattered against the tile floor. Hot coffee splattered across her slippers. She didn't notice. She just stared. Lips parted, eyes locked on the screen where the daughter she had scolded for dreaming too much was now being celebrated nationwide. Across town, Daniel sat in his office, his BMW keys tossed carelessly onto the desk. He scrolled his phone lazily until the same headline appeared in his feed. For a moment he thought it was a joke. Then the video auto-played my face on Bloomberg, my name trending online. His phone slipped from his hand, landing with a dull thud on the carpet. He leaned back, stunned into silence. This was the same brother who once smirked across the dinner table and called my work stupid shoes. The same man who mocked me for struggling to pay bills. And now, while he was tangled in a merger riddled with hidden debt, the world was praising the very thing he dismissed. The contrast was almost cruel in its precision. One sibling celebrated as a visionary, the other standing at the edge of scandal. Back in Boston, I watched the broadcast cut to analysts debating why MedLife Tech had chosen us. One said Stride Step's technology is revolutionary. It not only detects early signs of Parkinson's, but represents a shift in preventative health care. This is the future. Another added Rachel Morgan embodies resilience. From MIT to garage tinkering, she faced rejection after rejection. Today she redefines success. I exhaled shakily. Hearing strangers summarize my journey on national television felt surreal. Every insult, every laugh at my expense seemed to replay in my head, but now the ending was different. My phone buzzed again. Dozens of unread messages. Former classmates. Old colleagues, even people who had once ignored me entirely. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be connected to me. But it was one notification that made me pause a voicemail from my mother. I didn't press play. Not yet. Because at that moment, it wasn't about her or Daniel or anyone else who had doubted me. It was about the promise I had made to my grandfather years ago, the vow that no one else would suffer as he did without warning. It was about the quiet nights in that freezing apartment, the engineers sleeping on cots in the garage, the sacrifices that had built this moment. And yet I couldn't deny the flicker of vindication rising in me. They laughed. They had dismissed me. But here it was undeniable, splashed across every network in the country. In Pittsburgh, Daniel's silence spoke louder than any words. Reports of the SEC investigation were circling, though not yet public. He knew the storm was coming. And as he sat there watching my name eclipse his, the balance of power in our family began to tilt. The same mother who once told me to be more like him now stood frozen, her confidence cracked. The same brother who once prided himself on being the star now faced the glare of a spotlight for reasons he couldn't control. And me. I sat in my cramped apartment, laptop buzzing, television blaring, phone lighting up nonstop, and whispered to myself, this is just the beginning. Because while the world celebrated the billion-dollar headline, I knew the story wasn't over. Not for me, and certainly not for Daniel. while my face was flashing across CNBC as the young woman who sold her company for billions in New York, the glass tower where Daniel worked was lit up for another reason. Not celebration, scandal. That afternoon, the SEC officially announced it was launching an investigation into the very merger Daniel had been bragging about for months. The story exploded on Reuters before lunch, merger tainted by bad debt. Morgan and Associates faces crisis. Within hours, the stock price of the bank tumbled 30%. The trading floor was a sea of red, numbers falling like stones, screens flashing warnings, traders shouting into phones, their voices rising with panic. I wasn't there in person, but I didn't need to be. I got the first call from an old colleague voice practically buzzing through the phone. "Rachel, did you see the news? They're calling it the failure of the century. Your brother's name is everywhere. Not in a good way." I clicked open the New York Times. The headline made me stop breathing for a second. From Wall Street's rising star to embarrassment, Daniel Morgan under fire. And there he was, my brother's photo plastered under the headline. The perfect smile is gone. Instead, his jaw clenched, sweat dripping down his temple. He looked smaller, shrunk by the weight of it all. Inside the bank's New York boardroom, the scene was even harsher. The long mahogany table, the line of directors in dark suits, the air heavy like a courtroom about to hand down a sentence. Thomas Blake, the CEO, stood tall at the head. He slammed his palm on the polished wood. "Daniel, you dragged this bank into the mud with your deal. The SEC is on our doorstep. Shareholders want blood. What do you have to say?" Daniel's voice cracked as he tried to steady himself. We can still salvage this. If we adjust the terms restructure." Blake cut him off with a shout sharp enough to slice through the silence. "Salvage? There's nothing here to salvage. This merger is a humiliation, and you are responsible." Murmurs rose around the table. Some directors exchanged looks, lips curling. Others smirked faintly. The man who had strutted through the halls as if he owned the building was now cornered, exposed. I pictured it vividly. My brother, once so sure of himself, standing there with his hands tightening around his pen knuckles pale, trying not to show the tremor running through him. Meanwhile, the press circled like vultures. CNBC replayed clips of Daniel boasting about the deal of the decade. Now they ran side by side with plunging stock charts, anchors shaking their heads. On social media, financial analysts mocked him. Memes spread fast. One headline stood out from Bloomberg, "The merger that never should have happened, how Daniel Morgan gambled and lost." By evening, Reuters published a longer piece that cut to the bone. Wall Street has seen failures before, but rarely has a banker fallen so quickly, so publicly. Daniel Morgan, once groomed for partnership, may not even survive the week at his firm. The words weren't mine, but reading them felt like justice whispering in my ear. That night, while Stridestep's team celebrated quietly in our Boston garage with takeout pizza and champagne in paper cups, Daniel was summoned again by the board. I heard later how the meeting went. Blake pointed straight at him and said, "Our name is being ridiculed in every newspaper. You've turned us into a laughingstock. This isn't just numbers on a sheet. This is trust, and you broke it." Daniel tried to protest. His voice cracked under the weight. I wasn't the only one who approved the merger. Blake didn't let him finish. "But you were the face of it. And faces are the first to be sacrificed." Some directors nodded. A few whispered. Daniel's fate was hanging in that silence. At the same moment in Boston, I sat at my kitchen table laptop open watching the stock ticker roll. Red arrow after red arrow. I sipped cold coffee, a strange calm washing over me. My brother had laughed at me for years, called my work childish, told my parents I was wasting my life. Now his empire was crumbling faster than I could have imagined. The contrast was sharp enough to make me dizzy. Only a day earlier, I had been dismissed in my own mother's kitchen as the daughter who should be more like Daniel. And now here I was, celebrated on every major network, while Daniel's downfall was dissected in real time. Then came the text message. It was from another friend in finance, short and direct word, is Daniel might be forced out. The board is already talking about replacement. I set my phone down, staring at the message. My chest rose and fell slowly. It wasn't the joy I felt. Not exactly. It was something deeper, darker, heavier. Vindication. A sense that the world had finally drawn the line, that arrogance was paying its price. In Pittsburgh, I imagined my mother sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, scrolling through the same articles. Did she still think Daniel was the model child now? Did she regret comparing me to him, holding him as the golden son, while she dismissed me as a dreamer? Humiliation works in strange ways. For years I had carried it silently. Now it was Daniel's turn, and his humiliation was not whispered at a dinner table. It was shouted across headlines, broadcasted on every financial channel, stamped into Wall Street's memory. The mini-climax came when the New York Times updated their article late that evening. I refreshed the page, and there it was. Daniel Morgan, the banker once hailed as a rising star, is now the symbol of reckless ambition. Sources say termination is under consideration. I read the line twice, then a third time. A chill ran down my arms. He wasn't just losing face. He was losing everything. And still the story wasn't over. Because only days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. A voice, formal and measured, introduced himself as an executive from Daniel's very own bank. The words that followed nearly made me drop the phone. "Ms. Morgan, we'd like to discuss integrating StrideStep's technology into our risk management systems. Would you be open to a meeting?" The irony hit like a tidal wave. My brother's bank, the one that had elevated him above me for years now, wanted my company. And this time, I would be the one at the head of the table. Daniel's downfall was loud, humiliating, and public. But for me, it was just the beginning of something even greater. The emails wouldn't stop. My inbox flashed with invitations from CNBC, Bloomberg, Forbes. Everyone wanted my time. They wanted interviews, sound bites, photo shoots. I should have felt nothing but triumph. But then my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Daniel Morgan. For a moment, I just stared. My finger hovered over the screen. Memories flashed his smirk at the Christmas table, the way he leaned toward our mother and whispered, "Rachel's job is stupid." The laughter, the sting, the silence I forced myself into. I almost let it go to voicemail. But curiosity, or maybe something deeper, made me swipe and lift the phone. His voice was unrecognizable. Broken, hoarse. "Rachel, I lost everything. You have to help me." I didn't answer. Not right away. I listened to the sound of his breathing, uneven, frantic. The silence stretched until I finally said, "Meet me tonight. 8 o'clock. Riverview Cafe." The Pittsburgh air cut through me like a blade. December winds rattled the cafe windows, snow slanting in the glow of streetlights. Inside, the place smelled of burnt espresso and cinnamon rolls past their prime. He was already there. Not the Daniel I remembered, the polished banker in tailored suits, the man who thrived on applause. This Daniel looked hollowed out. His tie was loosened, his hair a mess, dark circles carved beneath his eyes. His hands shook as he wrapped them around a cup he hadn't touched. "Rachel," he said, and my name cracked in his throat. "I need you." I slid into the booth across from him. For a long moment, I said nothing. I just studied him. The man who once made me feel like a child at the adult table was now reduced to a shell. He leaned forward. "All I need is for you to say something good about me. To the investors, to the press. You have influence now. You could save me." The desperation in his voice might have moved me years ago, but now it only reminded me of every night I'd gone home humiliated, every call with Mom where she compared me to him every time he laughed when others mocked me. I folded my hands on the table. "You never respected me, Daniel. You never believed in my work. You called it stupid, and now you're asking me to use it to save you." He dropped his gaze, staring at the table like it could open up and swallow him. The silence was heavy, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine. Finally, he whispered, "I was wrong. I admit it. You're better than me. You built something real. You won." His voice wavered. "But Rachel, I'm still your brother. You can't just walk away." I wanted to feel pity. I wanted to remember him as the boy who once built Lego castles with me in the basement, who held my bike steady the first time I tried to ride without training wheels. But those memories were buried under years of arrogance and dismissal. I stood my coat sliding over my shoulders. I can't save you. This is the price of arrogance, Daniel. You wanted the spotlight, now you have to live with what it reveals. His hand shot out, gripping mine. His palm was clammy, trembling. Please. Rachel, I'll lose everything. I pulled my hand free. His eyes shimmered, but I didn't let myself soften. Then maybe it's time you learn what everything really means. I turned, walking away as his shoulders caved in. Through the window, I saw him slump forward, face buried in his hands. The snow outside fell heavier, muffling the city, as if the world itself wanted to cover his shame. Driving back to my hotel, the silence of the car pressed against me. For the first time in years, the balance of power between us had shifted. I wasn't the little sister hiding at the edge of the room. I wasn't the butt of a joke. Tonight I had walked away, and yet a part of me still ached. Not for the man Daniel had become, but for the brother he once was. Still, I knew I'd done the only thing I could. Helping him now would mean erasing every lesson I'd fought to prove. 2 days later, the storm broke. I was in Boston again, sipping coffee in my office, when my phone buzzed nonstop. Push notifications filled the screen. SEC expands probe Morgan & Associates under fire. Collapse imminent, board prepares emergency talks. Daniel Morgan faces ouster. Then the headline that made me lean back in my chair stunned Google and MedLife Tech among buyers circling Morgan & Associates assets. The irony was too sharp to ignore. The very companies circling Daniel's downfall were the ones rising with me, and then one line buried in a Financial Times article stopped me cold. Sources confirm Rachel Morgan, founder of StrideStep AI, has been invited as an external advisor in the evaluation process. I put the cup down, my hands shaking. The email confirmation arrived minutes later. Formal, polite, but impossible to misread. They wanted me. Me, Rachel, the girl with the stupid job, the family embarrassment. Now I was being asked to sit at the table where my brother's empire was being carved apart. The irony wasn't lost on me. Years of humiliation, years of silence at family gatherings, years of enduring his smirk. And now the world was forcing him to sit across from me as an equal, or maybe even less. That night I sat by my window in Boston, watching snow drift under the streetlights. My phone buzzed again, another wave of congratulations from friends, colleagues, even strangers. But one message stood out. It was from Dad. Short, simple, but it pierced deeper than any headline. Rachel, you've earned everything. Don't look back. I closed my eyes, breathing slow. For once, I didn't feel like I was fighting for space or for respect or for a chance. I had it. And the next chapter wasn't about proving myself anymore. It was about facing Daniel not as the sister he mocked, but as the woman who now held the power he had squandered. I whispered into the quiet room, almost to myself. This isn't the end, Daniel. This is just where the tables finally turn. 1 week later, I walked through the revolving doors of the Manhattan headquarters of Morgan & Associates. The lobby gleamed with marble floors and brass railings, but I hardly noticed. In my hand was a folder stamped with the MedLife Tech logo. This time I wasn't a guest. I wasn't the forgotten daughter at the family table. I was the official lead evaluator brought in to assess the very assets my brother once bragged about owning. The glass-walled conference room stretched the length of the floor. A long table sat at the center. 20 executives in dark suits lined up in their seats. The air buzzed with tension, low murmurs bouncing against the polished glass. Above us, white lights shone down like spotlights on a stage. At the far end of the table, I saw him. Daniel. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his skin pale, the dark circles under his eyes telling a story of sleepless nights. His tie was pulled too tight, his jaw clenched. For the first time, my brother didn't look untouchable. He looked cornered. Ladies and gentlemen, the chair of the board began, his voice formal. This is Rachel Morgan, head of the evaluation team from MedLife Tech. A ripple of acknowledgement spread around the table. Heads nodded. Pens were set down. For a brief second, all eyes landed on me. Respect, curiosity, recognition. The room no longer dismissed me as the girl with a stupid job. I could feel it in the silence that followed. Daniel, however, kept his gaze fixed on the table, refusing to meet mine. I placed my folder on the table, flipped it open, and spoke clearly. In your financial report, you list positive cash flow from affiliated entities $200 million. I paused, then tapped the page. After our investigation, we found those figures were propped up through 4 shell companies hiding bad debt. The actual number is negative $600 million. The room gasped. The chairs shifted. One executive muttered under his breath. I clicked the remote, and the screen behind me lit up red numbers flashing across the slide. Daniel's head jerked up. Beads of sweat gathered at his temple. "Rachel, that's just—" His voice cracked. I cut him off. My tone didn't waver. "This isn't speculation. It's evidence. Every transaction, every shell company, every cent documented here." I advanced the slides one by one, each revealing layers of hidden debt, fake revenue, and misleading transfers. The silence in the room grew heavier with every click. A board member leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Daniel, do you have an explanation for this?" My brother swallowed hard. His hands trembled as he reached for his glass of water. He tried to muster composure, but his words betrayed him. We can renegotiate terms. We can adjust the filings." I didn't look away. My voice sliced through the air. No, these numbers were falsified deliberately. And Daniel knew. He knew the truth long before the SEC started circling. The weight of the moment pressed down. For years I had endured his smirks, his laughter, his whispered insults at the dinner table. And now in the heart of his empire, I was the one holding the truth in my hands. Daniel's mask cracked. His voice broke as he whispered, almost pleading, "Rachel, please." The room froze. Every pair of eyes turned to me. For a long second, the air held steady. This wasn't the arrogant brother who once called me useless. This was a man undone, begging his younger sister for mercy in front of the people he once commanded. I felt my pulse steady. I let the silence hang before I answered, not to humiliate but to stand firm. MedLife Tech demands honesty. We won't build on lies. Not anymore. The chair of the board nodded slowly. Other executives exchanged looks, some grim, some almost relieved. A few scribbled notes. The weight of authority shifted right there, sliding away from Daniel and toward me. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about credibility, and I had it. He had none. Daniel lowered his gaze, shoulders slumping. For the first time in our lives, he wasn't the one towering over me. He wasn't the one being celebrated. He was the one shrinking, collapsing under the truth he could no longer bury. I closed the folder with a calm snap and pushed it toward the center of the table. Our team will continue to evaluate, but our conclusion is clear. What you choose to do next will define whether this institution survives or falls. The chair cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ms. Morgan." Around the table, heads dipped in respect. No one dared interrupt. No one dared laugh. The authority in the room was mine. Daniel sat frozen, staring down at the polished table surface, his reflection blurred by sweat and shame. The same man who once told my parents I was wasting my life now sat exposed, powerless, in front of strangers who no longer believed him. When the meeting adjourned, I gathered my papers, slid them into my bag, and stood. The board members rose as I passed, offering polite nods. Daniel didn't move. He stayed in his chair, head bowed, hands gripping the edge of the table as though it was the only thing keeping him upright. I stepped out into the crisp air of Manhattan's financial district. The glass towers loomed above sunlight, bouncing off their sharp edges. For the first time, I felt taller than them all. My phone buzzed in my pocket, another reporter requesting an interview. CNBC, Bloomberg, even the Wall Street Journal. They wanted my voice, my story. I paused on the steps outside the bank, watching people rush past with briefcases and coffee cups. Just a week earlier, Daniel was the name that commanded this city's attention. Today it was mine. And not because of hollow deals or polished cars, but because I had built something real. Something that mattered. The reversal was complete. In that boardroom, I hadn't just defended my company. I had dismantled the illusion my brother had lived behind. I had taken back the power he stole from me all those years at the family table. And as I stood there in the winter air, one thought ran clear in my mind: this wasn't revenge. It was justice. 8 months later, I found myself standing on the balcony of my new home in Santa Barbara. The ocean stretched endlessly in front of me, waves rolling in steady rhythm against the shore. The California sun bathed everything in warmth, so different from the biting winter nights I once endured in that crumbling Boston apartment. For a long while, I just stood there breathing in the salt air, letting it wash over me like proof that I had survived, that I had arrived somewhere I once thought impossible. Inside the house, the walls of the living room were lined with frames. Not art, not certificates, but letters. Each letter was a thank you from families across the country. Patients who had been spared falls parents, who caught a diagnosis early, grandparents who could walk without fear again. One frame held a note from a mother in Florida who wrote, "Your shoes gave my son his freedom back." Another came from a retired teacher in Wisconsin who said he could still garden every morning because of Stride Step. I ran my hand along the frames as if to remind myself this was the true wealth, the legacy no stock price could measure. That afternoon, my parents arrived for their first visit. I waited nervously at the door, unsure what it would feel like to welcome them into a life they had once doubted. My mother stepped inside first. Margaret's eyes scanned the high ceilings, the ocean view beyond the glass doors, then landed on the wall of letters. She walked closer, touched one of the frames gently, and then turned back to me. Her eyes filled with tears. "Rachel," she whispered, her voice breaking, "I was wrong. I didn't see what you were building. I didn't see you. I only saw the risks, the uncertainty. And I hurt you." Her arms wrapped tightly around me, and I froze for a second before returning the embrace. I had imagined this moment so many times, her apology, her recognition, but living it felt softer, calmer. The anger I once carried loosened its grip, and all I felt was relief. Behind her, my father stepped forward. Charles placed his hand on my shoulder, steady as always. He didn't need many words, but the ones he gave me landed with weight. "I always knew you'd make it here," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you, Rachel." We sat down for lunch on the terrace, the Pacific glittering in the distance. For the first time, the three of us shared a meal without tension, hanging like smoke between us. The clink of glasses, the sound of gulls overhead, it felt like the beginning of something new. But just as the air started to settle, a shadow appeared at the gate. I turned my head and saw him, Daniel. My brother, once the golden child, now walked slowly, shoulders hunched. No tailored suit, no gleaming car parked outside. He looked smaller, somehow diminished not just in stature but in spirit. He paused at the edge of the patio, then took a hesitant step forward. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Rachel, I need to say this. I'm sorry. For the years I mocked you for treating your work like a joke, for not seeing who you really are. I lost everything but you. You built something real. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I couldn't live without telling you that." The table fell silent. My parents exchanged a glance, neither speaking. All eyes were on me. I studied Daniel's face, so different from the proud man who once raised champagne glasses and boasted of billion-dollar deals. Now he was stripped bare, just a man who had faced ruin and learned humility too late. 1,000 memories flashed through my mind: the Christmas dinners, the sarcastic comments, the public comparisons, the quiet tears I swallowed in silence. For a long time I had carried the desire to see him broken, to feel what I felt. And now, here it was. I took a breath, my voice calm but firm. "Success isn't about proving them wrong, Daniel. It's about proving yourself right." He bowed his head. No argument, no defense. Just silence. And in that silence I felt the circle close. The rivalry, the bitterness, the need for revenge, it all drained out, leaving only truth. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat in my study overlooking the ocean. A new letter waited on my desk, still sealed. I opened it carefully. It was from a family in Texas. Stride Step saved our mother. We'll never forget what you've given us. I held the paper in my hands, staring at the handwriting. All the battles, all the humiliation, all the long nights had led here, not to wealth or headlines, but to this: a daughter thanking me for her mother's life. I placed the letter into a new frame and added it to the wall. Then I turned back toward the balcony where the waves shimmered under the moonlight. For years, revenge had fueled me. It kept me awake, kept me fighting, kept me from collapsing under their laughter. And yes, seeing the tables turn had been sweet. Watching Daniel stumble while I rose higher than he ever imagined, there was satisfaction in that. But as I stood there in the soft night air, I finally understood that wasn't the end of the story. The real reward wasn't in making others fall. It was in building something that stood tall on its own. It was in knowing that when the world dismissed me, I had kept going anyway, and that persistence saved lives. I whispered to myself, almost like a prayer. The truest revenge isn't watching them fail. It's proving that I was right all along. And with that, I felt the final piece click into place. Not anger, not triumph, but peace. I still remember that Christmas night. Daniel leaned toward my parents and called my job stupid. Everyone laughed. I said nothing. I just kept eating my soup. Back then I felt invisible, small, like nothing I did mattered. Years later, everything looks different. The deal went through. The headlines screamed my name. The money came. The house in Santa Barbara stands on a cliff where the sun sets gold over the ocean. But you know what I treasure most? Not the billions, not the interviews, not even the awards. It's the letters. The ones from families who say Stride Step gave them more time. A father who didn't fall. A grandmother who got diagnosed early. A boy who walks steadily now. Those stories mean more than any check ever could. My mom visits sometimes. She sits with me on the porch, quiet, holding one of those letters. She doesn't talk much anymore, but I can see it in her eyes. The regret, the pride, the love. My dad just smiles. I knew you'd get here, he says, and that's enough. And Daniel, he's not the man in the shiny car anymore. No more champagne, no more bragging. He's softer now, humbled. He once told me, Rachel, your success saved me from myself. I didn't answer. Some words don't need a reply. So what does revenge feel like? Honestly, not what I thought. It's not the money. It's not even the headlines. It's the quiet moments. It's looking around and knowing the thing they mocked me for is the very thing changing lives. To every woman who's ever been dismissed. To every daughter who's been told she's wasting her time. To every sister who's been compared, laughed at, or ignored. Listen, success isn't about proving them wrong. It's about proving yourself right. That's the deepest revenge.